Welcome, everyone. It's fabulous to be with you tonight. And tonight we are talking about exploring the Reggio Emilia principles from a neuroscience perspective. So I would love to welcome everyone online and also those who are accessing the recording after tonight. So it's very, very exciting to be with you tonight and talking about two of my favorite things: the Reggio Emilia approach and the brain. Okay, now this is your download for tonight. So what it is this pinwheel, and you can, if you know how the pinwheel works, the top cover moves around and this reveals different principles of the Reggio Emilia philosophy. So this is the download and you can get it on your phone. So if you have some way of downloading it, that'll be fantastic, because you'll get this, plus you'll get how to put it together, plus you'll get a summary of this presentation as well. Okay. So our talk this evening is the exploration of the Reggio Emilia principles from a neuroscience perspective. And we all have this incredible, amazing organ in our body. So just for a moment, would you pop your hands on your head? And while you have your hands there, I'm going to give you a little provocation. And the provocation is, what is the connection between a fish, a bicycle, and a mushroom? A fish, a bicycle, and a mushroom. And I'm sure that your brain, because it's so brilliant, can come up with lots of possibilities. But your brain is also a predicting machine. So you can take your hands down if you still have them on your head. Your brain is probably predicting that in this next part of the talk, I'm going to connect the fish and the bicycle and the mushroom. And of course, you're absolutely correct. But what is this incredible, amazing thing that is in your brain? Sir Charles Sherrington, the Nobel Prize winner and neurophysiologist, they call him the grandfather of neurophysiology, said that every time your brain lights up, it's as though the Milky Way had entered on some cosmic dance. So it's an amazing thing that's in your skull. Now, Dr. Jack Shonkoff, who is the leader at the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard University, he says that the most important time to develop your brain is in the first 5 years of life. So by the time a child is 5 years old, 90% of their brains are already formed. Then Dr. Dana Suskind, and this is her photograph, is a surgeon, and she does implants for deaf children. And when she was following up after she'd done the operations and visiting families, she discovered that there were enormous variances in the language of children in different households. And what her research eventually worked out was that some children are hearing 30 million words more than other children by the same age, by 5 years of age, this age that Dr. Jack Shonkoff talks about. Now, why is this critical information for us, as educators and leaders of our organizations? And it's this: the brain is the only organ that is largely formed from outside the body. It is actually built on experiences. So when the child is a baby, really most of what that brain is doing is responding to what is coming in from outside. As the children develop, they start to fill their brains with information and experiences so they can start to integrate what comes from inside and what comes from outside together. But because, excuse me, because the brain is built from the outside, the environment is extremely, extremely important. So what happens when children have experiences is that these very long thread-like parts of the cell called the neuron, of the neuron called the axon, become coated with a white fatty acid called myelin and creates a thing called a myelin sheath. And this only starts to happen when the this only starts to happen when the signals are strong and when the signals are repeated. So if children don't have experiences where their emotions are involved, where they don't enjoy what they're doing and they aren't well cared for, this myelination of the axons doesn't happen. And the communication and the building of the brain and the networks that are created in the brain don't happen as effectively. In fact, just before we go on to what strategies we can use to enhance that and support that deep learning, there is research done that children who don't get that stimulation, their brains physically don't develop as well. So research was done in Russia in some orphanages where children were left a lot of the day languishing in their cots with no conversation and nothing really to stimulate their brains. And when they took images of the brains, there really was a paucity of development in the brains of children who are not receiving great stimulation. So what strategies can we use to enhance and support deep learning? And I'm sure that as educators, you already know some of these, but we're going to go to a brain guru called Tony Buzan, and we're going to list a few of the things that he says enhances the brain's working. And I'm giving you a little acronym for this tonight, and the acronym is e-bikes. And now I know immediately you're going to say, Lillian, that's not how we spell e-bikes. It's incorrect. But I'm not going to correct it because it helps me in this acronym. And plus, because you thought about it as being wrong, it's probably aroused your brain more than if I had just written e-bikes. And plus, if you think about the provocation I gave you earlier, this is start of the idea of bikes and how it connects to the fish and to the mushroom. So the acronym stands for, E stands for emotion. Anything that impacts our emotion, that gives us a strong emotion, the brain pays attention and it starts to myelinate because it likes it, and it doesn't always have to even be a positive emotion. Even anger or surprise can help us. B stands for beginnings. We tend to remember things that happen at the start, called the primacy effect. The I is for interests. And I think if you're in early childhood education, you all know that children's interests are what drives a lot of learning. The C is for connection. If we can connect what is new to something that is already in our brains, some pre-existing information, we are much more likely to remember it. The following E is the opposite of beginnings, it's the endings. So endings are always a great thing to remember as well. And if you imagine things like a firework display, we all wait for the ending because it's always something resounding and exciting. And so we need to end experience for children also in exciting ways. And finally, the final part of the acronym of e-bikes is the senses. So the brain really responds to things that are coming in through all the different sensory pathways of our brains. And the more integrated that information is, the more senses that are stimulated at the same time, the stronger is the information and the easier it will go into long-term memory. So that is what Tony Bazan tells us. He also tells us that we have 1 million neurons in our brains. That is 1 with 12 noughts. And that every single one of those neurons can link to 10,000 other proximal neurons. And so that is like 1 with 8 pages of zeros. This is how incredible the brain is. But let's move on now. Let's shift from the brain, and I'll come back to neuroscience a little bit later. We're going to go to the principles of Reggio Emilia with a little story. So here we have these 2 little fish, and they're swimming along, having a little chat, having a fin wag, and they encounter an older fish coming in the opposite direction. And he says, "Good morning, boys." We'll make him a man this morning. "Good morning, boys. How is the water?" Anyway, the big fish passes, and the 2 little fish, one nudges the other and says, "What the heck is water?" It seems really strange because they are swimming in the stuff. Now, this story was first told in 2005 at Kenyon College by a man called David Foster Wallace. And he was the class representative. And he tells the story to indicate to us that very often the things that are the most important to us are actually invisible to us. And one of those things, and what is relevant for our talk tonight on Reggio and neuroscience, one of those things that is often invisible to us is culture. We all have a default culture. We have a personal culture, our families have culture, our classrooms have culture, our organizations have culture. And we can be oblivious to that, unaware of it, or we can be conscious of it. So, one of the questions for you to think about tonight is, are you perfectly happy with your organization's culture, or are there aspects you would like to enhance? Now, this idea about culture, for me, early on in my career, didn't mean very much. I always thought that culture was something that you inherited, it came down to you, it was a tradition, you acted it out and you followed culture. Until I went to Reggio Emilia and I met Amelia Gambetti, who was a speaker, and she said that culture is not something you inherit, culture is something you create. This was a revolutionary idea to me, that you, right now, in this minute, from this second onwards, you are the person who can create your own culture. So she was saying, interrogate your culture, think about your culture, keep what you love, but what you don't love, you have the opportunity to change that. So the little fish in our story are all about us being the ones to recognize the water that is surrounding us, recognize our culture. And that brings me to the bicycle in our story. This bicycle is drawn by one of my students, painted by one of my students called Casey. And I just absolutely love it. So who did this bicycle belong to? This bicycle belonged to Loris Malaguzzi, who was the formative thinker and developer of the philosophy of the Reggio Emilia preschools and infant toddler centers from his work in the 1950s until his death in 1994. And Loris Malaguzzi himself was a primary teacher, a secondary teacher. He studied at university. He studied psychology and pedagogy. He even started a center in Reggio Emilia where they worked on pedagogy, a pedagogical institute, where they had a lot of children with special needs. And he was always fascinated by learning. His entire life, he was interested in how children learn and think. So one day on the grapevine, and in Italy there are lots of grapevines, he hears about some citizens in a little place called Villacella, and they are building a school for their children, a different kind of school. So what does he do? He hops on his bicycle and he travels to Villacella. And my research tells me that he traveled on this bicycle 160 kilometers. And when he got there, what does he find? He finds that indeed there are citizens building a school. And what they had done was after the Second World War, so we're talking about 1946 here, they sold, and I still don't know if it's one or two, German tanks that had been left behind after the war, and also cleaned the bricks that were in the rubble to create this school for their children. And this school needed to be different. They didn't want the school to be ruled by ideas by the state or the government or anybody else. They wanted the school to be listening to the children, to giving the children the ability to be more creative. And Loris Malaguzzi fell in love with this school. And Villacella and his work with them, because he carried on working with these parents for many years, is pretty much the kernel of the Reggio Emilia schools. So those parents' hopes for their children and their love of their children started here in 1946. And then over a long period of time, he worked towards getting schools instituted in Reggio Emilia. So he worked with organizations, with the municipality, and they came up eventually with almost a set of rules or a regolamento for how these schools would operate. So they are actually state municipal schools, and the first infant toddler center and preschool was opened in 1971. Now there are 33 preschools and 21 early learning centers. So this is how the principles were agreed. It was done in a very democratic way, and Loris Malaguzzi over time introduced some fantastic elements and principles, including introducing pedagogistas and artilleristas. So pedagogistas are in charge of the pedagogy, and they work with groups of schools, with the teachers and the parents, to ensure that the projects are deep and meaningful and purposeful, and that everyone is involved and passionate about them. The artilleristas are art educators. Now, these art educators aren't there necessarily to teach art. The art educators are there to help the children to learn through art and to think through art. And the art, as you will see in a minute, is from not one language. It's not like just drawing. It is from 100 languages. And if you know about Reggio Emilia, of course, you will know about the 100 languages of children. Now, just before we head off and discover what these principles are, I want you to know that I've placed them in 4 categories. So the first one, the first 2, and if you've got your little wheel, and when you construct your little wheel, you'll see how the principles belong to different categories. So in vision, we have 2 principles. In relationships, which is category B, there are 2 principles. In category C, I've put the methodology, and there are 5 principles there. And then D is evaluation, and there's 3 principles there. So there are 12 altogether, and most of them are put in that section on methodology. And in fact, in Reggio Emilia, they wouldn't even want me to use the word methodology, because they don't like to think that anything is set in stone like a methodology. But I think it helps us to understand how they do things. And so this is the little wheel that you've been given, and you can move it around so that you can see the different principles there. But before we go there, I'm going to take you into a forest and pretend we're riding our bicycle or we're walking in this forest. And what you can see, I'm sure, is that there are trees and other kinds of fauna, and no, sorry, I can't see much fauna, other kinds of flora, different plants. And I want you to think about these trees and plants. Are they, we can imagine that they are all fighting for their own survival in competition with all of the other trees and plants around them. They may be fighting for water, for light, and fighting for their survival and their existence. I want you straight away to start to see this forest as the culture in your organization. So this culture might be in your classroom, it might be in your team, it might be across your whole center or organization, wherever you work. But start to see the forest as all the different elements and all the different people in your team. So whilst we think that everyone might be fighting for their survival, I mean, you can imagine as a teacher, sometimes you feel like you're all alone, and I know that if you're in a great center or school, that won't feel like that, but many educators feel alone and as though they're struggling to survive. But let's think now about the mushroom. So we have had a look at the fish and the bicycle, and now the mushroom. So we might think that a mushroom is a standalone plant, but in fact, it is just popping up out of the ground, showing its presence, but it's connected deeply to a vast network of fungal threads called the mycelium. So mycelium is under the entire forest. You can see that in the inset picture. And it benefits this ecosystem by breaking down organic matter to recycle nutrients and improve the soil structure and prevent erosion. So now I want you to think immediately about your place and your work experience and try to imagine how this metaphor works in your work. So what might be breaking down organic matter to recycle nutrients? So one of the things I think of is, what is your curriculum? How is your curriculum working? What are the best parts of it? What are the real nutrients? What is really feeding children's learning and passion? And when we talk about improving the soil structure, we're thinking about improving how we are offering the learning. And preventing erosion might be as simple as stopping the children from switching off in the middle of a lesson and disappearing into their own thoughts because they aren't engaged. Or losing your key staff because they don't feel as though they are connected as they would like to be. So let's extend this metaphor. So the mycelium forms this vast underground network that allows the plants to communicate and share resources and enhance their growth. So this is the culture of Reggio Emilia. No one works alone. Nothing is random. Everything is well thought out. Everything is communicated to enhance the growth of the children's minds, their language, their knowledge, their relationships, and their place in the world. Additionally, mycelium helps clean the environment by absorbing and breaking down pollutants. So the way I see this is that there might be toxicity in your community, there might be difficulties. Being together, working together in this network, you are able perhaps to change that, to rid your community of toxicity and pollutants and bring health and well-being. So this functions to make mycelium essential for maintaining healthy and resilient ecosystems. And in Reggio Emilia, they're very keen on constructivist philosophies and systems theory. So they really do believe that everything is happening within a connected system. Okay. So we'll start with the category A principles, which are the vision principles. And the first one is organization. And the second one is professional learning or formation. Now, I think we've covered organization in that beautiful metaphor. I think us understanding how mycelium works tells us how the organization in Reggio Emilia works. So I'm not going to spend time on that. It just means that every action, every person, every plan actually fits into the culture and makes the whole system grow. But I want to think a minute about professional learning, and I love the word they use for it, which is formation. So I love the word they use for it, which is formation. So you don't come in with all the knowledge that you are going to impart to the children. You come into the organization as someone who wants to learn, who wants to research and find out more. And they train their staff when they come in. They work side by side with other people. They introduce them to all of the philosophy and the principles before they even start working. And everyone in the entire center knows the philosophy, including even the chefs and the cooks and the ancillary staff, because the children go and speak to them and tell them, you know, when they might be coming for their meals, or go and find out what's available for them. So you come into the profession in Reggio Emilia and people help you to learn. So think about the tree that stands by itself and a tree that actually gains nutrients from its situation. So how can strengthening your network of support and your shared purpose, how can that elevate your already decisive leadership even further? Now, for me, leadership is not just about leading someone else. Leadership is leading yourself. Leadership is leading others, your peers, and I like to think about even leading upwards and sideways. And how can you strengthen a network and support each other for your own professional learning and formation? So this brings us on to category B, which is relationships. So the first one is the image of the child. And the second one is participation. So that's principles. I know I said first and second. The principle 3 and 4 are the image of the child and participation. So in Reggio Emilia, the children are seen as strong, capable co-constructors of their own learning, or co-creators of their own learning. They are not empty vessels to be filled. They are not empty slates to be written on. They come fully formed and ready to learn. And so the system of relationships, or the pedagogy of relationships, is integrated with the educator, the children, and the parents all being part of the community. And you'll see in these slides, the children are strong co-constructors, but the child is an individual within a group. So their own peer group, but also no one works alone. So, the child isn't the center of attention. The child is part of attention. And so the families are often asked about how they would like to contribute, and their thoughts and their ideas are brought into the entire system. So participation is about an individual within a group. And this differs from a lot of other educational programs where all the emphasis is on the learning journey of the individual child. So some of the difficulty around Reggio Emilia and the complexity of it is to try and follow a child and the child's individual journey within the group. And through my work over many years using the Reggio Emilia philosophy, you learn strategies. For instance, you might focus on particular children for a particular time, but then always make sure that all of the children end up in your documentation. So how do the preschools and infant toddler centers support these children's learning and their play and their creativity and imagination and their agency? How do they do that? So that is the methodology part, the methodology piece. And there are 5 of these. So the first one is this beautiful Italian word called, and honestly, if you're listening and you're Italian and I'm saying it wrong, forgive me, but it's progettazione. So progettazione is often translated in Australia as project-based learning. And it is that, but it also isn't that. So progettazione, I want you to imagine that you are holding in your hands this perfect, amazing idea or area of research that you know children are going to love. And it is important and it is purposeful. So you take this beautiful area of research and interest and you throw it into the future. You project it outwards into the future and you create a whole terrain that you can explore to engage with this idea. So an example is in Reggio Emilia, when I was there the last time, They did a fantastic project on where nature meets the digital world. So it's very, very broad. But they would think about all the many ways that children can explore this, what the digital equipment or digital languages might be, what the nature might be. And then they elaborate those ideas and they start to resource them even before children have ever encountered those ideas. They will also include children's interests that they know are around. So I want you to think of this project as the bicycle. So the bicycle has handlebars, and the bicycle takes the project in the direction that it's going to go. And it takes with it a whole lot of things, like it takes all the principles and all of this beautiful understanding of how children learn, and it takes every subject on earth. It's very multidisciplinary, and then it goes off into the terrain. So progettazione is a very broad brush idea of what the learning might be. Then what they do is they will think of a way to introduce that project to the children, and that is called a provocation. So from the progettazione, from that very broad terrain, they choose one amazing thing that will set children off in the direction. And at the Diana School many years ago, they wanted the children to research light and shadow. And so the provocation was that they popped the silhouette of a bird in black silhouette on the window and placed a screen nearby so that the shadow of the bird would land on the screen and then move across the screen as the day progressed. So that's how they started. That was the provocation. And after that, the children went in many different directions to explore shadow and light. So one of the methodologies is about research. So if we think about those children and the bird, the children are starting to ask themselves, why does this bird move? And in fact, they start to think of ways to capture that bird. It was so amazing. They drew a cage around the shadow to try and stop it from moving, but it wouldn't. Another day, they took pieces of grass and they built a cage and sticky taped it all over the screen. And of course, the bird escaped again. So then they started to ask themselves the question as to why this was happening. And the teachers didn't give them the information immediately. They had to work out for themselves about the sunlight, because one day when it was overcast, the bird's shadow was different. And over time, the children and educators together research the area that is in the progettazione. And they capture all the children's thinking and ideas. And they use the 100 languages. So principle number 7 is the 100 languages. Children, Loris Malaguzzi worked out that children had 100, and there's this beautiful poem called The 100 Languages of Children. So it's drawing and painting and dance and poetry and conflict and hundreds, clay, sculpture, so many different languages to express their thinking and their ideas. Then the idea that the environment is the third teacher. So after the parent and after the educator comes the environment. And the environment is set up so that children can interact with it and learn. So the resources are very well planned and designed and collected and imagined in advance of the children doing this learning, but also as the children engage with these materials and ideas and their thinking becomes clear, they might bring in new supporting resources. So they don't stick to the plan that they made originally, the educators. It gets influenced greatly by the children's interests and direction. And finally, one of the methods is learning as an individual and learning as group construction. So we've spoken about that earlier in the culture, that it's not a culture of the individual, that it's very much the culture of a community, be that another child, another educator, being that the parents, being that the broader municipality, or be that people in the city. So originally, Loris Malaguti would take the students out into the city with their painting easels so that they could see how incredibly creative and competent these children were. And after that, they started even collaborating. So there's an amazing project about children working with a shoe merchant in the city, and how they created these fantastical shoes. And the sculptures of the shoes came out of the shop and went all the way down the city along the pavement. And you can see there are lots and lots of books about the project in Reggio Emilia that can influence you and inspire you. So we now had a look at vision. We've had a look at relationships, pedagogy of relationships, and looked at these 5 areas in the methodology. So we come to the last group of principles, and this is the evaluation part. Now, broadly evaluation. There are lots of other ideas for this. Critical reflection, assessment. And I like to think of it, I'm a great fan of Edward de Bono and his hats. And the blue hat is evaluation. And the blue hat is all about blue sky thinking. And if you imagine if you're in the sky, you can see everything. You can see the whole entire landscape. And so you're looking to see what is working well, what is not working well. Should we continue in this line of research, or should we pivot to do something else? So that's what I like to think about evaluation. And how they do the evaluation is through a few things, but one of them is the pedagogy of listening. So they are listening to the children, and I'm going to broaden on that in the next slide. The pedagogy of listening. Then they also use in their evaluation documentation, pedagogical documentation to capture the children's thinking. And if you can see, I know the images are quite small on the screen, but this documentation is a project where a child came up to me and said, Teacher Lillian, that's how they used to talk to me, Teacher Lillian, I need to make a water moving machine. I said, okay, cool. What is it going to do? It's going to take the water all the way from one side of the sandpit to the other. And obviously, this is not a very easy thing to do. I mean, we have plumbers to do it today, and there's so many physics issues around taking water from one side of a sandpit to the other. But we used the 100 languages of children. We engaged this child's friends. We tested and trialed several different ways of doing it, different kinds of equipment. And eventually they managed to do it. But because we were documenting so carefully, the children understood the physics. They understood that, you know, if there was a space, water would come through it. They understood that sand is absorbent, that you need to elevate the pipes. And so lots and lots of learning is documented in this little description. So they document, and then they do this constant evaluation and critical reflection to ensure that they're on the right track, that the work is imaginative, that the work is groundbreaking, that the work is satisfying. So there are lots of different ways that they evaluate, and the pedagogistas will come in and help the educators to find the real value to redirect the project if it is necessary. So the pedagogistas have a really fascinating role and very important role in this education. And here are just some images for you to have a look at. So there's, I think that's Amelia Gambetti, and she's on the phone talking to people and maybe finding a fantastic resource person. Loris Malaguti spoke to architects, engineers, to poets, to authors. He spoke to everyone he thought, to philosophers. He read everything. He read Montessori, he read Piaget, he read Vygotsky, he read Brunner. Latterly, he read Howard Gardner, just to make sure that he was covering all bases. And here the children are convening in the kitchens, talking about with the cooks, and you can see how beautiful this is, getting down at eye level and them engaging with the children because they are part of the mycelium, the threads of this beautiful philosophy. And I want to briefly talk to you about the pedagogy of listening. So this is Carla Rinaldi, and she is actually now the current CEO of Reggio Children, and she speaks about the pedagogy of listening. And she talks about listening not only with your ears, you have to listen with your eyes, you have to listen with your mind, with your heart, you have to listen with your hands, and you have to listen with your spirit. Because you have to listen to every single part of the child to understand what they are telling you, what they are learning, etc. And what she says is this thing which absolutely slayed me. When you listen to children, you take them out of anonymity. Out of anonymity. So anonymous is when you're unknown, and the opposite of that is when you have an identity. And if you have an identity, you can see yourself in relation to others. You can see yourself as part of the community, part of your family, part of your school. If you can do that, you feel safe and secure. If you feel safe and secure, you belong. If you belong, you can venture and be brave and courageous. And if you can be brave and courageous, you can learn and try things. If you learn and try things and upskill yourself, then you can be successful in life, successful in your work, successful in your studying, and successful in reaching your potential and becoming the person on this planet you are meant to be. So I cannot emphasize how much I was struck by this idea of taking children out of anonymity. And we have to ask ourselves that question every day in their families, in their schools, where the children are experiencing this. So when you listen with your eyes, your ears, your mind, your heart, and your spirit, you listen for, just have a look at this photograph, and maybe you can tell me a little bit about what you see in it. And so you're listening to that moment, and you're listening to what are they saying? And sometimes we can actually hear it. How are they acting or behaving? What are they learning, or what do they know? What are they doing? How are they feeling? And what are they thinking? So the two green ones, saying and doing, are actually quite easy, because usually we can hear that. The acting and feeling, well, acting, we can't notice it because it's in their behavior. But what they're thinking, learning, and feeling, often we have to interpret. But we need to be listening out for it. And if we can't interpret, sometimes we can ask them. But this pedagogy of listening is really beautiful. So now let's go back to our e-bikes, where emotion, beginnings, interests, connection, endings, and the senses are important. And thinking about the kinds of things that the children are doing, you can see how immediately the Reggio Emilia fits in with this, because the provocation is a beginning, isn't it? And they want it to be memorable. And the endings are always beautiful with celebrations. And the entire environment is set up to be interesting and to engage the senses and to bring about connection and passion and emotion. So the fish is about creating a unique imaginative culture of learning. The bicycle is the progettazione, which is the art, craft, and science of partnering with children. And the mushroom is the organizational cohesion that benefits and sustains the whole thing. That's how they're connected. And when children are secure with a sense of belonging, they're in flow. I know these images are a little bit, maybe a bit inauthentic, but when they're unsure and there's possibly alienated, they can do what people do: fight, flight, or freeze. And I'd like to tell you about a little boy that I met on one of my consultancies. Let's call him Ben. Doesn't look like this, but let's call him Ben. I had been invited into the school so that I could observe the classroom process and help the educators to get the children more engaged. And I had a little break and I went into a side room, and I had checking my emails and things on my phone, but I had my iPad as well. And Ben comes in and he sidles right up to me, like he stands next to my shoulder. He didn't mind touching me, which was really interesting. And he said, "Who are you? What are you doing? Are you coming back to our classroom?" And then said, "Can I play a game on your iPad?" So I said, "No, you can't do that. You need to go, Ben, back into your classroom to go and learn with your friends." He says, "No, I don't want to do that." And anyway, I am just the classroom nuisance. And I go, what, in my mind? This is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. Someone has given him this identity as the classroom nuisance. So I said to him, "Well, you don't want to go in the classroom?" He says, "No, nothing interests me." So I said, "Okay, so what does interest you?" Pokemon. Pokemon. There's not a thing about Pokemon this child could not tell me. He knew the characters, the stats, the evolutions, the entire game, the value of everything. This child is 100% switched on to learning, but he's just not switched on to learning in school. And no one at school has found or unlocked his interest or tried to develop it because he's a classroom nuisance. In another place that I was visiting that week, this is a primary setting. There are children who are given 2 hours to play in the morning in a primary setting, and they are working on a project on the human body, same age as Ben. And this child is using a heart-shaped chocolate box, and they are constructing the heart. Now, believe me, while they're constructing the heart, they are naughty, they're noisy, they push each other around a little bit. They don't do it all in one go. They don't concentrate the whole time. But when they get together to come and tell everyone about it, they know everything. And they are so articulate, and all of their thinking and the learning that they've constructed together, they are able to convey when they come into the group to talk about it. The rest of the group's also doing the human body. And here is the skeleton done in so many different ways. And just have a look at the incredible detail here and the writing. So we're talking grade 1, and the level of writing is amazing. And this incredible collaborative project with the whole circulatory system and all of the bones in incredible detail. And here we see the educator, and she's talking about the hand. And for engagement, if you have a look at how the students are behaving, they are really in it. And this is one of the drawings that comes out of having a look at the detail in your own palm of your own hand or your own hand. And someone felt like they definitely had to have nail polish as well. So here, I just love this. This is talking about sound. And the top sound is a nightmare. The second sound is yelling. The third sound is a disco. The fourth sound is a siren. Can't you hear it? Wee wah, wee wah, wee wah. The next one's a laser beam. Then there's clapping. There's booing. There's a busy place. And then there's drumming. And I just think that's incredible when you can see the 100 languages at work here, when the children are at play, but are coming up with this learning that is very purposeful and very valuable and sharing it with their friends. And that was primary school, but this project is from a project I did around water as one of the elements of Earth and its uses on Earth. And these are 4-year-old children. And you can see their individual drawings at the top and how they put into this collaborative piece. So at no stage are any of those children told that they are a nuisance. So the child who is a nuisance has frozen for school, or they're fleeing for school, and they are not engaged and they are not in flow. So the organization in the Reggio approach builds a thriving educational community for everyone involved. It is a safe, predictable environment that improves children's learning by engaging the prefrontal cortex, which aids emotional regulation and decision-making. If you're in flight or freeze, you're not in the thinking brain, you're almost in a survival brain, the amygdala. So there's a focus on belonging and security, and that encourages cognitive engagement and resilience. Children are valued for their work, and so they tend to spend longer at it. Then, in the teacher's capacity, with this organization and formation, their ongoing professional development enhances their social cognition, their empathy, and their adaptability. And the collaborative learning amongst the educators improves skills, reduces isolation, and strengthens the commitment to the core values. So the framework supports individual learning, and it creates an inclusive, growth-oriented community. So that sense of security, the sense of predictability, sense of belonging are very good for the brain and for learning. When it comes to the relationships, relationships are key because the Reggio philosophy connects children, educators, and families. Neuroscience shows that secure relationships improve brain development, lower stress, and boost cognitive function. This sounds repetitive, but this comes not from the organization, it comes from the relationships. So you can be secure in your environment because it's predictable, but also you feel like you have a relationship to others. Children are seen as co-constructors of learning and capable of shaping their own educational experiences. Hands-on, meaningful activities strengthen neural pathways, build resilience and adaptability, and interconnected relationships develop empathy and social learning and activate the emotional regulation pathways for healthy social interactions. So you could see in that small group when we were talking about the children at the table, the empathy and the social learning and that kind of cohesion. And children weren't running around. There wasn't stuff that was higgledy-piggledy. They'd use their knowledge to build that area and to negotiate within it. So the methodology. So progettazione, or what they call dynamic planning, supports flexible, socially constructed learning, enhancing decision-making and problem-solving skills. Neuroscience shows that such learning promotes neural growth, we saw that, and accelerates brain development. Research exploration activates the brain circuits because you're curious, you're trying to find out what's going on, and that encourages children to explore and inquire deeply, and that activates their brains. The 100 languages of expression promote multisensory learning through art, music, and movement, activating different areas of the brain. Engaging various sensory modalities improves memory, cognitive flexibility, and creative thinking. Neuroscience confirms enriched environments stimulate brain plasticity, deepening neural connections. Remember, Tony Buzan said that each neuron can connect with 10,000 other neurons, but they only do that when they're activated. So that saying is, what fires together wires together. And if nothing is fired, nothing will wire. Predictable, safe environments reduce anxiety and cognitive load, enhancing learning capacity and emotional regulation. Well-organized spaces support the prefrontal cortex development and aid emotional regulation and decision-making. Art materials and resources engage different parts of the brain, offering unique insights and deepening exploration through various forms of expression. I want to just go back to that, offering unique insights. So in the water moving machine, until the children drew the system, they didn't really understand the idea of, you know, when they were drawing the problems, they realized they had to raise the pipes so that the water would flow. Drawing gave them different information. Hands-on things give you different information. Sound gives you different information. And when you put them all together, it deepens the learning. So in the evaluation part, the Reggio Emilia approach values reflective practices highlighted by the pedagogy of listening and documentation. Neuroscience research shows deep listening activates empathy-related neural networks, improving children's validation and emotional security. So validation, Ben didn't have validation as a learner in the classroom. Ben was the nuisance. So he did kind of have emotional security because he was able to engage with me, and he was able to come and stand shoulder to shoulder, or his body to my shoulder, but his validation had not happened in that space. Documenting learning processes boosts self-worth and promotes critical thinking, creativity, and problem-solving skills. These practices help children to recognize their capabilities, enhancing their positive self-concept and the ownership of their ideas. Encouraging students to express their contributions as individual and collaborative learners reinforces their sense of agency. They feel like they have control. Continuous observation and assessment enable educators to adapt their teaching methods effectively, nurturing a deeper understanding of each child's learning journey. Overall reflective practices in the Reggio Emilia approach align with neuroscience, promoting optimal learning experiences and supporting individual growth within the community. So we can go back to the e-bikes. You can see how the emotion, the experiences of starting somewhere and ending somewhere, harnessing interests and harnessing the senses are fantastic ways of enhancing children's learning. So that brings us back to these elements in the Reggio philosophy: the fish, the culture, the project, and the mycelium. And so that brings me to the end of this, my part of this presentation. But now what I'd like to do is to think about something that you would like to change straight away in your center, and then perhaps you can share it. And if you're listening out there to the recording, my email address is on this screen and my phone number. So you can message me, or you can send me your reflection, and I will be delighted to communicate with you if something in this presentation resonated with you.
Can I ask a question, Lil?
Sure.
I'm curious to know a bit more about documentation over time and how you make that visible in the environment so children can perhaps, I guess, see the learning journey over a period of time. Is that something that, and go back to perhaps where they started and all of those kind of things? Is that something that you, or that is encouraged through this process as well, with the documentation?
Yes, so the documentation is displayed in different ways. I'll start with the displays. So it can be up in the classroom, it can be in a parent reflection book, and it can be on panels, some of those really beautiful panels that you saw at the end of projects. But the actual documentation starts when you are discussing the work with the children, and you record what they're saying, and you take photographs of what they're doing. And it's not a one-off thing. You're right. It's something like being a journalist. If you don't have the whole story, then you haven't done the documentation. So what you're interested in your documentation, like say that with the bird and the shadows, is the moment when a child discovered that it was the sun that was responsible. And then that child's thinking is recorded, and it's part of the whole story. And so you might have the drawings put up in the classroom. You might have a book so children can go back and have a look at it. And they get so excellent at remembering who did what, who said what, who drew what, whose idea that was. I've had children remember that over 2 years because we did books together. And they could remember right all the way back whose idea it was, because they learned to value that. And then so you do that throughout the project, and people do it in different ways. They might have the children's names on a clipboard, and they write the conversation as it happens. In early childhood, we're really fortunate. We have a second adult in the room. So my co-teacher would often record, or if she was running the children's conversation, I would record. And then I would often type it up in the evening, because that would really make me understand what the children's thinking was and how it was changing and becoming more complex over time. And then at the very end of the project, once you've got all that and all the children's learning has happened, and projects can be like the water moving machine was maybe 2 weeks. The water project that I showed you was over 2 full terms. But when you get to the end, there's some way of celebrating that. So you might have a little exhibition in your classroom, and those children who did the body image, the body study, they had a fantastic exhibition, prep exhibition at the end of their year, where parents came and could see all of the work that had been done. And sometimes a book is published with the community. So documentation is captured across the whole thing. And you also can't document everything. So you start, over time, you learn not to document anything that doesn't add, anything that's repetitive. You don't want. You want the first time. You don't really want to add. You want something that changes something, that transforms something, that is a unique perspective. You want those, what they call the nodes, the little nodes in the network. You want to capture those and then explore and explain the children's journey. And, you know, also maybe what educators did or what a resource person did to validate it and to make it fascinating.
And do you do most of that documentation with the children, or is it more of a reflective process by the adults?
The adults do capture a lot of the children's words and a lot of the interactions between the children, and they do a lot of the photography. But children can also document themselves. So it just depends what you're doing. Like we had a project which I called body talk, how you use your body to communicate. And this was done across 2 groups. The other group used photography, and those children documented that entire project through photography. So they had a photographer set up with a camera, and then they had a child who would demonstrate the feelings of excitement, calm, joy, surprise, and then they actually took the photographs, and it was pretty unbelievable. But clearly you always have the educator in the background working on progressing the learning. And so, you know, there would have been some talk and stories about feelings, just so that the children came into that situation where they could document, but with a lot of knowledge and imagination. The thing about interests is that they get better and better and deeper the more the children know. So I think a lot of the time in our schools, they might document a child's interest, but it might be an absolute one-off, like they played with the dumper truck in the playground in the sand and they moved this and that and whatever. And the following day, they might document the same thing with the same children. My question then is, how does this fit into the broader learning in different areas of learning, and what can you do to advance that activity for children? So you might give them some kind of a mission or add some language, or so you, as an educator, you're always there trying to find the next step. And I know you and I both love a spiral. You're wanting to spiral things up. Yeah. So Elena, we've been talking through planning time. But is there something from tonight that you think can make a difference that you'd like to start doing when you go back into your spaces?
Yeah, I did lots of notes. I love the metaphor you used, the fish, mushroom, especially the mushroom and the bike. Yeah, I loved that. And I never ever thought about the Reggio Emilia principle approach to be linked with the neuroscience. And thank you for your effort to put all those, like, your documentation really clearly. Yeah, so I'll have a really carefully extra reading after we finish tonight.
Fantastic. Yeah, the thing is, in Reggio Emilia, I say this and people don't believe me, but they don't do peer-reviewed papers and university research about their philosophy. Other people do that. They believe that school is not a part of life. School is life, and that they are doing life. But if you look at the neuroscience of learning, because this is for me, why would I validate? Why would I recommend that parents get involved in a Reggio Emilia philosophy? For me, it's so clear when I started learning about neuroscience, how these things match together and how those beautiful, and I am so in love with the brain, and how that neuroscience can, how the neuronal network is strengthened through the way these children have so much agency in their own learning and listening to other people. And it goes for life. And that's what the other thing they say is, we're not educating these children for life, but we know that when they go out, that the teachers tell us that they are fully equipped to learn. They really are outstanding learners and thinkers because they're given that space. So, I mean, I extend that idea of the bicycle, where the handlebars, the bicycle is the project, the handlebars is the direction, and sometimes the children are directing and sometimes the educators, that the front wheel is all of the principles and they go with the project. You don't leave them behind. The back wheel is all of the 100 languages, all the different subject areas. It's science, it's STEM, it's because in the early years, we're so lucky we can use these multidisciplinary things. Fantastic. Then the saddle at the back, behind the saddle, is where you carry all your resources. And then you can visit different terrains. But the thing about a bicycle is it never goes backwards. So even if you want to go backwards to go and research something that you've done already, you have to turn the bike around and you are going in that direction. It doesn't go backwards. It always goes forward, and it's always going to the big idea. So, if you're going to visit the baobab tree, and that's your idea, but along the way to get there, the children are interested in the waterfall, you take them there and you link the waterfall to the baobab tree. So that's how you follow the children's interests, so that eventually they all get to the baobab tree, or they all learn how to connect nature with the digital, or they learn about the science of light, the science of shadow, or they learn about how you make, one of the incredible projects was to create a crowd out of clay, and how to get the crowd to stand together, and which ones should be in profile and which ones, because a crowd doesn't all look the same way, or there are laws and rules about a crowd. So just understanding that and making all of their clay figures so that they all did the right thing to be a crowd. So there's just so many unbelievable ways that you can explore with young children. And I can see you're lighting up in how you can talk to other people about the Reggio philosophy now. I'm so happy with that. And I would love you to cross-pollinate these ideas. So to go into your community and carry some of this information like the bees do, carry this valuable pollen, and be the people who change things and make things grow.
Thank
I'd
you.
love that. Yeah, I'd love that for you. Beautiful. I hope I haven't broken your ears by talking all night. But I just absolutely do love this philosophy, and it does so fit with how the brain learns. So do you have any messages for any of the people who might be watching the recording? I'd love you to talk to them and say something, a message for them.
I just want to say thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. It's full of the Reggio Emilia approach and yeah, inspiration, the details and information, formations. Yeah.
Well,
And
it's been my absolute joy to do that. And you know what? I'm happy to do it anywhere, anytime. And just in case any of our watchers and listeners might be interested, and you too, Elena, I've got a book coming out
yeah.
called The Power of Play, the 7 dynamic learning zones of play. And there's a lot of information about how I used Reggio Emilia in my classroom over a long period of time in that book. So maybe you'll tell some people about that as well. I'll be very excited.
Yeah. Bring it down. Time to order new books.
Yes, time to order new books. Well, I thank you so much for your time and for your listening. You've been very resilient to do that. And I know our paths are going to cross again. And next time, I will know exactly who you are.
Thank you. And if next time you are both in Adelaide, you're more than welcome to come visit our centre.
I
Yeah.
definitely will come when I'm in Adelaide.
Yeah.
All right.
Take
Bron,
care.
do you have any messages for anyone?
Just that I really liked the way that the Reggio and the neuroscience messages came together, and I think those are really both very important, particularly for early childhood and early year settings. So it's great that you were able to so articulately bring those two things together. For me, that made a lot of sense.
Well, thank you so much, Bron. And to everyone who'll be watching this recording, I know time zones can be tyrannical. To my dear friend Kelly in Canada, I hope you enjoy this presentation. And to my friends in the Philippines and in the UK who said that they follow up and who registered, I really wish you well and hope that you journey and that you also gain benefit, but please also communicate with me and tell me what you are going to be doing around Reggio and neuroscience.